Don't drink that!
The music died first, not because the orchestra had finished its final note, but because every violinist froze with their bows suspended in the air, their faces drained of color, as though death itself had wandered into the imperial ballroom. Nobles from every province stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for one single thing: Godfrey Norwood, the Beast Duke, to drink. His reputation had arrived years before he ever stepped into the capital. They whispered that his territory birthed monsters from cracks in reality itself. He was seated at the center of the high table, and beside him sat his bride. Odessa Evercroft had scarcely touched her meal. He hadn't even spoken a word to her since the ceremony. His jet-black eyes fixed forward with a clinical indifference that was its own kind of fortress. Godfrey raised the wine glass, but the world shifted for Odessa. Her Shatter-Sight, the forbidden gift she had hidden since childhood, flared to life. To everyone else, the wine was a rich, dark crimson. To her, it was a map of death. She saw glowing, violent veins of absolute lethality, spreading through the liquid like a spider web, indicating only one thing: the Duke had been poisoned. The impulse was faster than thought. Breaking every law of Victorian etiquette, her chair scraped violently backwards as she lunged across the table. Don't drink that! Her voice sliced through the ballroom like thunder. The silver glass flew from his hands, hitting the marble floor. Dark wine burst across the white floor like spilled blood. The Duke's magic, a volatile crystalline that lived just beneath his skin, reacted to the shock. Jagged obsidian thorns erupted from the table, the dark glass-like stone tearing through the wood with a screeching sound. Nobles and servants alike screamed. Wine glasses and porcelain shattered. The room exploded in gasps and frantic whispers. In the shadows of the balcony, a figure in high-collared black coat watched the shattered wine spread across the floor. A single disappointed exhale escaped from him as he turned his back and vanished into the mist of the corridors, his failed attempt a silent promise of more to come. Around the ballroom, whispers spread like wildfire. Has she gone mad? I heard she was the cursed daughter. Lord Evercroft's complexion had gone completely white. Odessa's breath hitched as the Duke turned his jet-black eyes on her, the heat of his anger radiating from his skin. But her mind was already racing back to the grey morning that had led to this very moment of ruin. While the echoes of this chaos are still vibrating through the halls, dear viewer, hit that subscribe button now to ensure you're part of the lineage that uncovers the truth. Because just hours earlier, the Evercroft's manor had been a tomb of desperate pride. Her father, Lord Evercroft, stood by the window, his silhouette thin and fragile. The family was drowning in the aftermath of the pitted fever, the same sickness that had taken Odessa's mother, leaving their family's textile fortune in tatters. Originally, the plan had been simple: marry the perfect sister, Rose, to the Duke of Norwood. Rose was the crown jewel of the house, a woman of soft smiles and gentle manners, who possessed no magic to complicate her social standing. In contrast to Odessa, with her wild urban coils, fierce-spirited, and the decayed nature of her Shatter-Sight, was the daughter they had kept in the shadows, the one who saw the cracks in the wall they tried to pretend was whole. As a little girl, she had once informed a blacksmith that his prized sword would snap during the next tournament. 3 days later, it broke exactly where she had pointed. Once, she refused to enter a chapel moments before the ancient bell tower collapsed. Sometimes, she could see the spoils in grain. She grew up never understanding why she could see them. She only knew the world revealed its faults and weaknesses to her. But when the news reached them that the Norwood estate was a death zone of magical anomalies, the family's greed turned to cowardice. Lord Evercroft could not sacrifice his golden daughter to the beast. In the cold morning of the dressing room, he had gripped Odessa's shoulders, his voice a frantic low-frequency rasp. You will marry the Duke, Odessa. Rose cannot survive that manor. But you were born for the cracks. You will wear the veil and save this family." Odessa looked towards Rose. "I'm sorry, sister, but better you than me." Odessa slowly turned towards her father. "You promised the Duke your eldest daughter." "I promised him an Evercroft." The servants looked away. Lord Evercroft picked up the wedding veil himself. "You have always frightened people. You survived every whisper." "I survived because Mother was there for me." At the mention of his late wife, something flickered across his face, just only for a second, and then duty returned. "The carriage leaves in 10 minutes, Odessa." He ignored all her protests, forcing her into the heavy ivory silk and pushing her towards the carriage. Minutes later, Lord Evercroft was guiding his daughter towards the chapel doors. When they opened, the organs began. Godfrey Norwood stood waiting at the altar. He did not smile. When Godfrey lifted the veil, the silence had been absolute. This was not the woman whose portrait had accompanied the imperial contracts. His black eyes moved briefly towards Lord Evercroft. Several imperial witnesses stood only steps away. Royal scribes, even the emperor's representative. If Godfrey rejected the ceremony now, it would publicly accuse House Evercroft of deceiving an imperial decree. Worse still, rival noble houses eager to seize the obsidian core mines would use the political chaos to challenge his legal authority over the region while the empire debated the broken alliance. He calculated every single outcome in an instant. None benefited his name. And so, he accepted the vows, but the look he gave Odessa was one of pure tactical suspicion. He believed she was a spy sent to map the weak points of the obsidian core mines. If they could deceive the empire, sending a spy into his household would hardly trouble them, especially one rumored to possess impossible eyes, he thought. And now, he's standing in front of shards of black crystals and chaos. The mess of the shattered glass was still sizzling on the floor when Lord Evercroft stepped forward, his face a mask of performative shame. "My apologies, Your Grace," he said, his tone dismissive and cold as he looked at Odessa. "My daughter has always been erratic. A touch of the nerves, I'm afraid." Her father sat her back down with a firm, painful grip on her arm, treating her like a disordered child in front of the most powerful men in the empire. Odessa sat in a simmering silence, her light brown eyes tracing the vibrational fault of the marble pillars. Her heart heavy with the realization that she was the only one who knew how close they were to shattering. The journey to the Norwood territory lasted 3 days. The farther north they traveled, the quieter the roads became. Inside, the manor felt colder than winter despite the roaring fireplace. Godfrey dismissed every servant until only 2 of them remained inside the enormous room. He did not offer tea or pleasantries. "You are not the selected bride." "I am aware." Odessa did not expect anything less. "I do not enjoy deceptions." Godfrey frowned. "We have no need for a shared life, Odessa. You will have your wing, and I will have mine. Our paths need not cross, except when duty to the family line requires mutual presence. Until then, do not cross the threshold of my study." Odessa matched his eyes with her own fire. "Do not worry," she retorted, her chin lifting in a show of fierce spirit. "You are disappointed your bride was exchanged," she nodded once. "I am disappointed I was the exchange. Believe it or not, Your Grace, becoming the mistress of this manor was never the dream I embroidered into my own future. But I suppose we both have our disappointments to bear. I hope your east wing has decent windows, Your Grace." She turned, her footsteps echoed steadily down the long basalt corridor, leaving the Beast Duke alone with a suspicion that I refused to settle. Not once during the journey had she begged for affection or pleaded for sympathy. She had simply carried her fate with the quiet dignity of someone who had long accepted that no one intended to choose her. Most people feared him, others desired his influence. Odessa was neither. She challenged him. A faint smile threatened to touch the corner of his mouth before discipline buried it again. Remarkable, he murmured to himself. On a damp night, when the moon was eclipsed by a heavy charcoal cloud, Odessa could not sleep. The very walls of the manor were screaming to her shattered sight. She perceived a massive structural fracture in the manor's primary defenses, a magical weakness that acted like an opening door for an enemy. Clad only in her black silk night robes, her hair a wild halo of auburn curls, she followed the line of instability until she found herself breaking into Godfrey's private refraction chamber. She stood there, her face completely perplexed. A voice behind her froze her thoughts. I was wondering how long it would take. She turned. Godfrey stood in the doorway, his broad muscular shoulders bare. He moved instantly. So the spy finally reveals herself, he hissed, his shadow tendrils lashing like whips. What secrets were you hoping to steal in the dark? Odessa didn't flinch. She pointed to the wall behind him, where the jagged violet light was beginning to seep through the stone. The fracture. What fracture? He sneered. I am the only one in this house who can see the faults in your defenses, Your Grace. If I were a spy, I would have let that wall collapse while you slept. The only reason your heart is still beating is because I smashed your glass at the gala. She explained what she had seen in his wine through her special sight, indicating that he had been poisoned. He looked at the wall, then back at her. You expect me to believe invisible cracks brought you here? She walked forward as she pointed. This pillar, she tapped it gently. The fracture begins 2 feet beneath the surface. It was forged by imperial architects, Godfrey replied. Well, it is failing. She picked up a small bronze instrument resting nearby, and without warning, she struck the exact spot. The entire outer shell split neatly apart. Hidden beneath, a dark crystalline crack snaked through the support exactly where she had predicted. Godfrey stared. Impossible. A look of profound quiet appreciation flickering in his eyes. He realized then that he wasn't being sabotaged, he was being shielded. He drew a slow breath and then inclined his head. It was not a deep bow, but from the Beast Duke, it was extraordinary. You have my thanks. Godfrey turned back towards the damaged wall. If someone poisoned me once, they will try again. As the autumn turned into winter, Odessa used her magic sight to seek out the fractures in the Duke's estate, and they were mended by the Duke's workforce. She watched him one afternoon while he trained beneath cool clouds. With a simple gesture, an enormous obsidian walls erupted from the earth. The soldiers applauded. Only Odessa saw him pause afterwards. His fingers trembled almost imperceptibly. Inside his chest, the crystalline thorns contracted. She looked away before he noticed her staring. Her heart ached unexpectedly. So this is the Beast Duke everyone feared. A man enduring agony so quietly that even his own soldiers mistook endurance for strength. From that day onward, she stopped seeing him as only the Duke, and she began seeing his burden. And perhaps that was far more dangerous, because compassion had always been the first quiet step towards love. Far beyond the estate, inside the candlelit chamber, beneath an abandoned monastery, a pair of blue eyes studied a map marked with black lines. Commander Bramwell of the Order of the Argent Vigil folded his gloved hands behind his back. His men remained at ease behind him. The poison attempt failed. He lives. Bramwell's pale blue eyes reflected the candlelight without warmth. The beast must not simply die, he must lose control. When the obsidian power inside him finally reaches critical fracture, he smiled. The virtuous explosion will appear entirely natural. One man finally dared to speak. And afterwards, Commander? Afterwards, Bramwell's gaze settled upon a geological survey. His fingers rested upon one location. Beneath the Norwood estate lies the richest prismatic mercury ever discovered. The mines will require new stewardship. He smiled faintly. And history always favors the man who volunteers to restore order. He began his move, weaving a web of betrayal that reached into the very heart of the Evercrofts, using their greed to prepare the ground for a solstice that would leave the kingdom in ruins. It was Peter, Odessa's brother, who found the first thread of unraveling, while searching through his father's private study in the Evercroft estate. He never saw eye to eye with his father and hated how cruel he had become after their mother's passing. He discovered a false bottom in the heavy mahogany desk. Inside laid a stack of urgent orders for the family's textile mills, signed in a hand that Peter recognized with a shiver. Commander Bramwell. The documents revealed a plot of staggering social cruelty. Bramwell was using the Evercroft's loom to weave a sable shroud, a fabric of impossible beauty, but infused with the microscopic ground shards of Godfrey's stolen obsidian. Once the elites of the kingdom were clothed in the silk during the winter solstice, Bramwell intended to use a low-frequency broadcast to turn the entire aristocracy into his mindless, suggestible puppets. In exchange, the Evercroft debts would be erased from the royal ledgers, and Lord Evercroft would be appointed as his second-in-command once political control shifted. Peter arrived in Norwood Manor 2 dawns later. He had not slept. The documents remained tucked inside his coat like burning coals. When Odessa entered into the receiving room and saw her brother standing there, her heart lurched. "Peter?" Peter returned a courtesy, but it was very brief. "I need to show you something, sister." Godfrey entered only moments later, saying nothing as Peter spread Bramwell's correspondence across the long oak table. The room fell silent. The realization hit Odessa with a numbing force as she cross-referenced Peter's findings with the Duke's shipping manifest. Peter exchanged uneasy glances with the Duke. Finally, Odessa whispered, "I have been wrong." Godfrey remained perfectly still. He knew I would see the faults, and he counted on it. I would spend every waking hour finding fractures inside this estate, repairing walls, examining magical barriers. She laughed bitterly, understanding striking her all at once. And while my attention remained fixed on every visible crack, her fingers landed on the missing shipment records. Someone quietly emptied your minds. Silence swallowed the room. I wasn't the sacrifice. She looked at Godfrey. I was the distraction. The next day, Godfrey ordered every mining report from the previous weeks. By evening, the truth stood undeniable. Entire caravans of refined obsidian had vanished before reaching the imperial customs. Warehouse inventories had been altered, supervisors bribed. Seal every mine and arrest every foreman whose signature appears twice. Close every northern route, Godfrey ordered. Yes, Your Grace, his footman bowed. The order spread across Norwood before sunset. Within days, dozens were arrested and several confessed. Godfrey successfully reclaimed authority over the mines, but the stolen obsidian had already disappeared into the royal capital, and Bramwell only needed one final performance. On the night of the winter solstice, every noble family gathered for the grand winter exhibition of arts. The event celebrated sculpture, textiles, and mechanical inventions. The ballroom was a sea of shimmering sable shroud, the elites of the city preening in their obsidian-infused finery, unaware that they were wearing their own chains. Godfrey arrived wearing a formal black royal outfit. Odessa walked beside him in deep midnight blue. Odessa stared at the sable shrouds glooming in the ballroom. To her eyes, thousands and millions, tiny obsidian fragments slept underneath every woven thread. Her stomach turned. She whispered, "Godfrey." "I know. The gods are already moving." Godfrey's hands quietly found hers beneath the applause. Bramwell stood on the mezzanine, then casually lifted what appeared to be an antique ceremonial handbell. The Marrow Bell. He rang it once. The tiny notes vanished beneath triumphant violins. No guest heard except Godfrey. Immediately, his body locked. A sharp breath caught inside his chest. Odessa looked at him. His pupils had narrowed, and black crystalline veins spread beneath the skin of his neck. The invisible thorns around his heart suddenly contracted hard. The bell's frequency had found them. Godfrey staggered. The marble beneath his feet cracked. Without warning, massive obsidian spikes erupted through the floor, threatening to crush the guests in a forest of dark glass. Guests screamed. Crystalline chandeliers shook violently. Another wave surged through his body. Odessa didn't run for the exit. She didn't look at the Duke's face. Instead, she looked at his chest, seeing the erratic jagged vibrational flow where his magic and the bell's frequency were colliding in a deadly knot. She threw herself in his arms, pressing her palms flat in his heart. "Leave!" His voice sounded fractured. "Look at me, Godfrey!" Odessa cried. He instinctively did. Another violent pulse slammed through him. She closed her eyes, feeling every vibration. "Let the breath out, Godfrey," she commanded, her voice a fierce whisper against his ear. He couldn't. She smiled softly despite the chaos. "You trust calculations." "I do," he groaned. "Then trust mine. Don't fight it. Direct it through here." Around them, the exhibition hall continued collapsing. The orchestra stopped playing. Guests ran in different directions. Only the bell continued singing its invisible song. Slowly, his breathing followed hers. In. Hold. Now let it go. His pulse shifted. She felt it. There. Again. Don't force it. The violent pressure inside his chest stopped clashing against itself. Godfrey let out a low guttural growl of surrender, his hands gripping her waist as he leaned into her bosom. He rasped, his breath hot against her neck. He released one final breath, a deep, perfectly controlled exhale. A low crystalline wave spread outward from his body. Something beautiful, a sound that resembled a cathedral choir humming beneath frozen lakes. In the blink of an eye, the harmonic pulse rolled across the exhibition hall straight to the marrow bell, shattering it into a cloud of metallic dust and instantly neutralized the obsidian shards in the guest's clothing. The force hitting Bramwell with the weight of a falling mountain. Godfrey slowly raised his head. The agony had vanished from his eyes and only judgment remained. Godfrey didn't wait for the guards. Bramwell reached for the concealed pistol beneath his coat, but he was too slow. Godfrey clenched his hand, and a focused spear of black crystals tore through the air, striking the commander. Bramwell fell back, his body pinned by a dozen jagged shards. Blood spread slowly across the polished white marble, his body hanging suspended for one impossible moment as the snow drifted through the shattered ceiling above. Then, as the crystals withdrew, Bramwell's lifeless body collapsed. News reached Evercroft Manor before sunrise. Lord Evercroft abandoned breakfast halfway through the report. Without another word, he fled deeper into his estates, locking every door behind him like a man trying to hide from judgment itself. The young couple did not celebrate. Their fury had become colder than winter. Inside Godfrey's private study, he opened an ebony case. Within rested a gnarled seal, a heavy black signet ring engraved with the ancient crest of his house. Generations of power rested inside one piece of obsidian. He placed it gently into Odessa's palm. She looked up. "Your Grace?" "My magic has always been a cage, Odessa." His voice remained quiet. "But my wealth," he closed her fingers around the ring, "is a weapon." He stepped closer. "And you, my wild red head, have been trampled by a family for too long. It is time you became the sword. Use this to strip the skin from their names." Using the gnarled seal, Odessa didn't just strike, she erased. She utilized the Duke's total monopoly over the coal routes and the shipping lines to perform a supply chain strangulation. Within 48 hours, The Evercroft textile mills fell silent as the coal required to heat the looms was diverted to northern ports. Simultaneously, she systematically bought every single one of her father's outstanding debts from the London lenders, becoming his sole creditor by nightfall. The end for Lord Evercroft came on a crisp, frosty morning. Coming out of his hiding shell, arriving at his private office, frantic and disheveled, only to find the hallway blocked by two of the Duke's guards. He burst through the doors, shouting for his clerks, but stopped dead. Odessa was already sitting at his desk. "You are ruining your own blood, Odessa," Lord Evercroft roared, slamming his hands onto the desk so hard the inkwell rattled. "The looms are dead. I will be a beggar in the streets by sunset." Odessa didn't even look up from the ledger she was signing. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea before meeting his gaze with a look of icy indifference. "Ruining? How dare you? You traded my blood for a dowry, father. Not for the strengthening of our name, but for your own greed and need for power. I am simply balancing a ledger that has been read since the day you deemed me expendable. Your mills belong to the House of Norwood now. I suggest you find a coat that fits a commoner. The winter is going to be very long." "You cannot do this!" Lord Evercroft yelled as Norwood's guards dragged him out. Winter lingered over the Norwood Highlands for several more weeks. The snow no longer felt hostile. The mines had awakened again. Workers laughed where fear once lived. Norwood had survived. On a rainy Tuesday in the form of Rose, the golden daughter stood in the cold foyer of the manor, her once vibrant silk dress now a tray of dust and frayed at the hem. She looked small and pathetic against the grandeur of the basalt walls. "They have taken the furniture, Odessa," Rose whispered, her voice a thin broken rasp. "Even the coal. I have nowhere else to go. Please, I only need a small loan to keep the manor warm." Odessa stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the sister who had once been the family's pride. She remembered countless winters, sitting beside the cold fireplace because Rose's room always received the last of the firewood. She remembered dresses, altered to fit Rose while she wore the hand-me-downs. She remembered birthdays forgotten. "You said I was the burden every family is unfortunate enough to carry, Rose. It is remarkable how quickly warmth teaches people its value. I cannot give you a loan, but I do have a vacancy in the servants' wing if you are willing to learn the value of honest work. You may stay. Otherwise, the door is behind you." Rose looked at the floor, her pride finally crumbling, as she gave a shallow shaking courtesy of acceptance. Tears quickly slipped down her cheeks. "Thank you." Odessa gave a small nod towards the head housekeeper. "Mrs. Hensley." The older woman stepped forward. "Show Miss Evercroft to her room." Rose hesitated before following, turning her back one more time. "I'm sorry," before she finally moved away. That evening, the sky glowed with streaks of amber fading into violet. The obsidian mines stretched across the valley like veins of black crystal beneath the earth, their lanterns twinkling one after another as workers returned home. High above everything, Godfrey and Odessa stood upon the western balcony, the air fresh with the smell of new growth. Godfrey wrapped his heavy scarred hand over hers, the Norwood seal glinting in the light. Odessa leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the peace below. "I think for the first time in my life, I can see a wall that isn't about to break." Godfrey turned her to face him, his jet black eyes filled with a devotion that made the very air soft. "Then, let us stop looking for the faults, Odessa, and let us start building the masterpiece." Sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people whom we share the same genetics. Tell me, if you were in her place, would you ever forgive your family? Please share your whispers below, and if you enjoyed this record, hit that subscribe button to join our house. Thanks for watching.